So Rabosai, we're here on Daf Beis Amud Aleph, and we're up to Rabbi Chizkiah Sha'al. So we'll count up from the bottom of the Amud, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines up from the bottom. And it would seem that the word Sha'al is Miloshon She'ela, that he asked a question. And yet, in the Pirush here called Taklin Chadatin, he writes, Sha'al Eitzel B'nei Beis HaMedrash, Im Yaskimu Al Shitaso Hanachona B'Einav. In other words, the language of the Yerushalmi, which again, part of what we're doing here in learning Shekalim is we're trying to get a little bit of a taste of what the language of Yerushalmi is. And to my understanding, this is the only Masechta in Yerushalmi that we're going to be learning. So it's sort of like an investment in the future. And according to this interpretation, the word Sha'al in the Yerushalmi has a different meaning. It's not like Iboilahu. Iboilahu means, we had a doubt and we vacillated. But Sha'al means that he had a theory and he checked it out in the Beis Medrash, and he asked the Talmidei Chachamim in the Beis Medrash whether they would agree and they would support his shita. Im yaskimu al shitaso anachona b'einav, v'cheinu sugyas hayushalmi b'kam makomos. The Taklin Chadatin says that you'll find it's all over the Yerushalmi. The Ka'amar Sha'al, you'll find the word Sha'al in the Yerushalmi, v'eino loshan she'ela. It's not a language of Iboy. Ela hayabaru b'einav. V'lo Sha'al, he wasn't asking a question. He knew exactly what was true, but he wanted to make sure that they in the Beis Medrash would agree with him. Okay. Me'ata. Now, let's just repeat what we said at the end of yesterday's discussion, that the Shluchei Bezdin on the 1st of Adar was sent around to tell the people that it's time to bring and to prepare their shkolim, and that was 1 month in advance. So therefore, Me'ata, B'nai Bavel, now we have a problem with B'nai Bavel. Why? Because the Shluchim was sent from Bezdin in Yerushalayim, and Bavel was at a great distance from Yerushalayim. And here we have a principle which we find at the beginning of the Gemara in Gittin called Ein Shayaros Mitzuyos. In other words, there weren't what's the word? The English word escapes my mind for shayaros. There weren't Can anybody help me? What's the
caravans?
Caravans. Okay, we'll call it caravans. There's another word actually, Mitch, that I'm looking for, but it's similar to the word caravans. In any event, there weren't caravans going back and forth on a regular basis from Yerushalayim to Bavel, so that even if they sent out the shluchim, the question is, would they reach Bavel on time for Rosh Chodesh Hadar? How long in advance do we have to notify the people in Bavel that they have to prepare their shkolim? So he says that what would make it appropriate, and this was the opinion of Rabbi Chizkiah, that he wanted to check out and get the approval of the other members of the Beis Medrash, that mashmiim al hashkolim mirosho shel choref. We should really begin to notify the people in Bavel as early as the beginning of the winter months, because lo kadesh yaviu Yisrael shikleim be'onasam. Don't we, lo is like a rhetorical question, is it not so that we'd have to notify them, or at least begin the process of sending out the notification far in advance at the beginning of the winter, so that we can guarantee that they will bring their shkolim in the right time? So that we can now designate and use those monies in the Trumas Halishka for the new Karbanos Tzibur of the year in its time on the first of Nisan, because we've already derived from Gzeira Shava that on the first of Nisan, Rosh Chodesh Nisan, we have to be Torem from the Lishka Trumas Halishka from the new shkolim that came in, and to guarantee that the new shkolim will come in from places far flung, like for example Bavel, we have to notify them already earlier. I mean, at least set up this process in order to guarantee that their shkolim would come in on time before Rosh Chodesh Nisan. He says that the beginning of the winter is Chodesh. Oh, so let's just review one more point here, because the Pnei Moshe has a slightly different text than we have in the Yerushalmi, which is so typical. So our text says the Tchilas HaChoref. But if you change the word Choref by changing the Dalet to a Resh, which is quite common, a Dalet and a Resh are very similar letters, but then you're going to change the letter pei to a shin. All right, that's a little bit more of a jump. So you end up with the word Chodesh. And this reflects back to our discussion about an Iber, right? We said yesterday you can have an Adar Rishon and Adar Sheni in a Shana Muberes, and it would be too early to send out the word about Shkolim, which is called Mashmiyim al Shkolim, which is a Hachraza, as early as Rosh Chodesh Adar Aleph, which is 60 full days before the time for the Trumas Halishka Chadosh of Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And when you say tell something 60 to people 60 days in advance, by the time they forget it, it doesn't register. But the Gemara is saying now in the name of Rabbi Chizkiah that with regard to Bavel, it would make sense that we send out the shluchim as early as Rosh Chodesh Adar, meaning Adar Aleph, the first of Adar, and not wait till Adar Beis, because the process of the shluchim reaching as far as Bavel is concerned, when there are no shayos mitzuyos, is a long, tedious process. So let's notify them as early, send out the shluchim as early as Rosh Chodesh Adar Aleph. That's how the Pnei Yoshua understands this Gemara based on his girsa of instead of Choref, it's Chodesh. Okay, now when Rabbi Chizkiah came to the Beis Medrash and he asked for the approval of his shita in terms of an earlier notification for the Bnei Bavel, he did not get what he wanted, which was, I guess, unanimous approval. And in fact, Rabbi Ula was the one who stood up to argue against Rabbi Chizkiah. Hasiv Rabbi Ula. Right? So Hasiv is like Mesve in the Bible. Rabbi Ula raised the following objection. Komi Rabbi Mana. Now, Komi means in the presence of Rabbi Mana. So it's Rabbi Ula in the presence of Rabbi Mana, who's asking the following question. I guess Rabbi Chizkiah had to ask this question. Nobody at that particular moment responded, but later on, Rabbi Ula, in the presence of Rabbi Mana, responded to Rabbi Chia's claim. Vataninon, We learned in a Mishnah, and this is a Mishnah later on in the third parak, and it says Vishlosha Prakim Bashana. Right, there are 3 times in the year. Tarmin es halishka. Tarmin means to take the money out of the lishka in order to use it to buy karbanos tzibur. And the word lishka, we translated modern Hebrew as an office, but it really means a chamber. And the lishka was a chamber, if you recall, where they would place the shkolim. Then they would take out the money from the lishka in order to buy karbanos. And there were shlosha prakim. There were 3 times. What was the first time? Bifros haPesach. Pros is a half of a month, which is 15 days. So 15 days before Pesach, which is Rosh Chodesh Nisan, was the first time of the 3 times that they would withdraw money from the chamber of the truma of the shkolim. The second time was pros atzeres, which means 15 days before Chag HaShavuos. And the third was befros HaChag, which is 13 days before Chag HaSukkos. So that's a quote from the Mishnah in the third parak. Amalei, so Rabbi Ula turns to Rabbi Mona, and he comments in a rhetorical question based on this Mishnah. Neymar, should we not say that the notification in all the countries was on Aleph Adar? In other words, the Mishnah seems to indicate pros HaPesach, which we said was Rosh Chodesh Adar, 15 days before the Pesach. It doesn't seem to make any distinctions here between those who are closer to Eretz Yisrael or in Eretz Yisrael, those who are in far places. So in other words, there are places that are closer to Yerushalayim, there are places that are further away from Yerushalayim. They were Torem at the latest possible time for those who came late. And what does it mean? It means that they were Torem, Elam, Dekrivin, the Yerushalayim, Bifros HaPesach. Now, I assume the word Elam means those.
Elah, yeah.
Elah. And those who are closer to Yerushalayim, 15 days before Pesach, they would withdraw the funds from the chamber. So they were close to Yerushalayim, and it would be very plausible, and we could assume that they would bring their shkolim during that month. So that by the time we got to Echad bin Nisan, they would be able to withdraw that money, which is called Pros HaPesach, for the new karbanos. However, Ilain Derechokim, those who are distant from Eretz Yisrael, then when did they bring their shkolim? They would bring it during the months of Nisan and during the months of Nisan and the month of Iyar. And therefore, the second time period for removing monies from the Lishkas HaLishka for the purpose of buying karbanos would be Bipros Hatzeres, 15 days before Atzeres, towards the end of Chodesh Iyar. You follow? What Rabbi Ula is saying here is that what does it mean, Shlosha Prakim? And the Shlosha Prakim correspond to the different communities around the globe. Those communities that were close to Yerushalayim and Eretz Yisrael, that was Bipros HaPesach. Those communities that were further away, it was Bipros HaAtzeres. And those who were even further away, which I'm not exactly sure how far they were, but that was Bipros HaChag. This means, says Rabbi Ula, that we have an explicit Mishnah against Rabbi Chizkiah. Rabbi Chizkiah wants to make sure that everyone would bring their shkolim, no matter how far they were away, by the first of Nisan, so that the first of Nisan, we would have already a collection of all the shkolim of all the Jews all over the world. And if need be, the hachroza, according to Rabbi Chizkiah, would be earlier. But now we see the Mishnah saying the exact opposite, that those who are close to Yerushalayim, they would have already supplied the Trumas HaLishka with that shkolim by the date of Pros HaPesach, meaning Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and those who are further by the end of Iyar, meaning 15 days before Shavuos, and those who are even further, 15 days before Sukkot. So if you ask when the Gizbarim were actually taking the money out of the Trumas HaLishka in order to buy the Korbanos, the answer is they did it on 3 different days. And those 3 different days corresponded to the various communities and the time periods in which they would bring their contribution, their shkolim. So it means that we're not interpreting the Mishnah the way Rabbi Chizkiah would have it. It says here, Lefi hadekaimel and b'sholim v'torshim ilchas hachag shloshim yom kodem haregel pros uloshen prusa, meaning machzis hazman. It means 15 days. So the word prusa or pros means that we take the 30 days kodem l'regel and we divide it into half and we get 15 days. That's called pros hachag. The chag starts 30 days before, and therefore pros hachag means 15 days. We take that 30-day period and split it in half. And that's when they would Torah es halishka, 15 days before each one of the chagim. But the staggering of the Trumas HaLishka was a reflection of the various distances, the communities, and the distances they were from Yerushalayim. And he says, the next words in the Gemara, which are on the top of Beis Hamid Beis, are Amar Le. Now, who's Amar Le? So he quotes one of the commentaries here in the footnote that the Amar Le on the top of Beis Hamid Beis are Hemshech Divrei Rabbi Ula. And that seems to be a reflection of a Ksav Yad of the Yerushalmi, which is called Ksav Yad Leiden. So I mention this to you not because I'm such a great scientist in terms of Talmudic science, but since we're embarking on a new a new endeavor to try to understand the Yerushalmi, I think it might be important to get to know that there were different manuscripts of the Yerushalmi. And in the manuscript from Leiden, which I believe is in Germany, check me out if I'm right on that. That's where in that Ksav Yad you'll find that Amar Lei is a hemshech of Rabbi Ula. Then he says that it's better to just simply remove the words Amar Lei, because Amar Lei sounds like we're getting a response from someone else, and it's not the continuation of Ula's presentation. Then he has a girsa that's quoted by some early source. Im lo nemar. I don't know. What does that mean? Im lo nemar. I guess there was a text that said im instead of aleph lamed, and he wants to erase that text of im. I see. Because we have the words Amar Lei written out, full words, but apparently there was a girsa of aleph lamed, right? A Rashi Tevis of aleph lamed, and he writes that it's a mistake. That the Mefarshim say that it shouldn't say aleph lamed, which would imply like a new statement. All right. In any event, let's just read what Ula has to say here. If it's Ula. Now again, if our Girs is correct, then Omar Lei is Rabbi Mana, who is responding to Ula's question based on the mission in the third parak. And then what we're going to have here is a defense for Rabbi Chizkiah. And he says, Kula ka'achas hi ba'a, which means all the Shekalim had to be there by no later than Aleph Nisan, which is the exact opposite of Ula. So it means that we have to guarantee, as Rabbi Chizkiah pointed out earlier, that even those who lived in far-flung countries, far away from Yerushalayim, and Bavel was pretty far too, is Kula ka'achas hi ba. Even those far places had to bring their shkolim by no later than Aleph Nisan. So therefore, the Hachraza has to be adjusted to facilitate the bringing of the shkolim earlier, and that would be as Chizkiah said, Rabbi Chizkiah said, B'tchilas HaChoref, so that everybody would bring their shkolim by Aleph Nisan. V'lama amru b'shlosha prakim. So now you can hear Ula yelling and screaming. What do you mean? It says b'shlosha prakim tarmim es halishka. Kidei lasos fumbe l'davar. Fumbe means lefarsem es hadavar. So why did they do a truma 3 times during the year? Ula had understood that was for the purpose of facilitating the collection from the rechokim, from the places that were far away, but now it's saying something else. That this all has to do with Maris Ayin. What does it mean, Maris Ayin? Sheyira ilu azman hasheni hu b'shvil harechokim, v'azman hashlishi b'shvil harechokim yoser mehem. Kidei lasos fumbi l'davar lefarsem hadavar shegam harechokim chayovim. the im achen yesh bertzonam sheyikhu shikleim lekarbonos alem lahaktim lahavi ad aleph bin Nisan. So the concept of pirsum adover in this context, and in the note here he quotes the Chazon Ish, is in order to notify the people who are far away that they're also obligated the mitzvah, and if they want to fulfill the mitzvah properly and supply the Trumas Halishka with monies, the shkolim for karbanos, then they have to be mezaris themselves, and they have to get their money, make sure it gets there by Aleph Nisan. Send it special delivery. So he says here that the Shlosha Prakim is not for the purpose of the Rechokim and the Bavliim, but rather for Maris Ayin. Now, what's the Maris Ayin? Sheyira ke'ilu azman hasheni hu b'shvil harachokim. It should look as if the second period of time is for the Rechokim. So it sounds like the Gemara is operating here on two different levels. Meaning, on one level, the Gemara is saying that the Shlosha Prakim here for the Trumas Halishka was for the purpose of the Rechokim. I'm sorry, was for the purpose of Maris Ayin, not for the purpose of the Rechokim. But on the other hand, it says Kidei Lasos Pumi L'Dover, which sounds like this is for the purpose of the Rechokim, and we want to publicize it so that they'll know that they're obligated in the shkolim and get their shkolim in on time. So let me read to you a note here in the English translation. He writes that the Gizbar would take out from the Trumas Halishka only on behalf of already collected donations and for the purpose of purchasing the karbanos. So the donations of Jews who live far away from Yerushalayim, and the donations did not reach the Mikdash by Rosh Chodesh Nisan, these people would have no share in the karbanos hatzibur, because again, their donations did not reach Yerushalayim by Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So at what point in time would these people who are far away be able to participate in the Karbanos HaTzibur? And they would have, a shutfus and a contribution for the Karbanos HaTzibur. That would be close to Shvuos or Sukkos. Now, on the other hand, the Jews who lived closer to the Mikdash would have no share in the Karbanos after Shavuos or after Sukkot. So now what is Rabbi Mana telling us here when he says, Kula ka'achasi ba'a? He says that a system that does not allow all Jews to participate in the entire year's offerings in plural, is unreasonable. Therefore, he concluded that all of the half a shekel donations must arrive in Yerushalayim by the 1st of Nisan, and that Rabbi Chizkiah correctly ruled that the shkolim proclamation for the Bavliim must be made at the beginning of the winter so that their donations would arrive in Yerushalayim by the 1st of Nisan. So it's really interesting because what happens here, and this is all the Taklin Chadativ, is that Rabbi Mana was responding to Ula with the words Kula Ka'achasi Ba by saying the following, that Ula, you're interpreting the Mishnah as if the donations were coming in staggered, depending upon where you lived and how far you are from Yerushalayim. And that would mean that there were three Trumas Halishka, 3 times during the year, that the Gizbarim would withdraw funds from the Shekalim and buy Korbanos Tzibur. In the first group, whether Yushalmim, meaning close proximity to Yerushalayim, they participated in the Korbanos that were brought from Pesach until Shavuos. When I say Pesach, I mean a month before Pesach, or let's say 15 days before Shavuos. And those fellows, so to speak, were completely excluded from the Korbanos that were brought when he was Torem the Lishka Biprosa Shavuos, and that he did when the new Shekalim came in from those faraway places, etc. Biprosa Chag. The same thing applied. Comes along Rabbi Mana, and he says, no, Rabbi Chizkiah is right. It cannot be that we're going to divide up the Korbanos of the Tzibur into 3 different groups. There was one group of Korbanos Tzibur that came from one group, and they owned part, they contributed towards that group, and another from another group, and a third. It's Kula Ka'achasiba. Now, if Kula Ka'achasiba, it means that no matter where you are on the face of the earth, you have to be mezaris yourself and guarantee that the Shekalim would come before Rosh Chodesh Nisan, because otherwise you aren't going to be part of the partnership of bringing the Korbanos Tzibur. And we want the Korbanos Tzibur to be on behalf of the entire Tzibur of Klal Yisrael. So what does it mean, Shlosha Prakim? So he says, Kidei Lasos Pumbi Lidavar. So again, on a Doraisa level, for sure, there was no need to be Torem the Lichka 3 times during the year. They could have been Torem once. And by Rosh Chodesh Nisan, they had already a collection of all the Shekalim of all of Bnei Israel all over the face of the earth. But there's a Drabanan. And they would have a withdrawal not once, not twice, but thrice. And that coincided with the Sholosh Regalim, when the Jews were gathered together in Yerushalayim. Now, what was the point of taking from the Trumas Halishka 3 times during the year? The withdrawal of funds for the Korbanos at those times, meaning corresponding to all 3 regalim, reminded the people that they had a personal share in each and every communal sacrifice. That's what it means, Lasos Pirsum Lidava. Again, we have, I still don't understand where the Maras Ayin comes into the picture, but we'll try to focus on that in a minute. But there are 2 slightly different variations of how to read the Gemara, Kidei Lasos Fumbi Lidava, to publicize the matter. The Taklin Chadatin seems to understand that it was important to notify the people that they had a personal share in every single Korban Tzibur. Whereas this interpretation that I gave you before, which is based on the Chazon Ish apparently, that Kidei Lasos Fumbi Lidavar is to notify them that they better get there before Rosh Chodesh Nisan with their Shekalim, because Gam HaRachokim Chayovim. Now, again, there are 1,000 questions that flood my mind. I mean, where's the Pirsum Adavar of being Torem es Halishka. Where were the cameras and the videotaping of the Gizbar going into the Truma to take out Shkolim to buy Korban Sibur? Apparently, around Pesach time, when there were masses of people that came on Aliyah Regel, there was a certain public nature, or they bought korbanos. They had to go to the marketplace, and there was a kol. There was some sort of a kol. A kol meaning a rumor. The word was spreading that they were being Torem the Lishka. Again, they didn't have to be Torem the Lishka. On a Doraisa level, it would have been sufficient to be Torem the Lishka once a year on Aleph Nisan. But they spread it out over the 3 regalim, and they did 3 Trumas Halishka during the course of the year to buy korbanos, all around regal time. And this to publicize, meaning, did you participate? We're bringing korbanos. We're clearing out the Trumas Halishka money in order to buy korbanos. We're buying animals in the marketplace. Did you contribute to this Korban Sibur? Were you part of it? Did you make sure that your shekel would get there before Rosh Chodesh Nisan? But what's the Maris Ayin business? I don't want to belabor this point too much, but he says that Lama Amru B'Shlosha Prakim, Masha Chazu V'Tarbu Sholosh Pam B'Shana, Ena L'Toel Sar Chokim V'Ama Acharim, Ela Mipnei Maris Ayin, Sheyira Ke'ilu Hazman Hasheni Hu B'Shvil Arachokim V'Hazman Hashlishu B'Shvil Arachokim Mehem. Oh, I see. This is confusing pedagogically. The word Maris Ayin, the phrase Maris Ayin here is a borrowed phrase. It doesn't mean Maris Ayin. You remember yesterday we spoke about the begadim that the Gizbarim have to wear, it shouldn't have pockets. That's a different kind of Maris Ayin. That's a classic Maris Ayin. He's using the word Maris Ayin to mean to give an impression to the people who are spectators. It's not the real reason. Meaning Maris Ayin is when you see something and you interpret it falsely, as if, like let's say if we talk about almond milk, right? So it looks like he's drinking milk with his meat. So that's like a misimpression. That's what the word Maris Ayin means here. And the misimpression is that we are bringing we're being Torem the Lishka at, let's say, at the second regular, called Shvuas, for example. Ki'ilu, it's for those who are far away. Why do we want them to get that impression? Because we want to notify them that if they want to participate in these korbanos, they better get the shkolim in. The im yesh b'rtzonim sheyiku mishikleim lekarbanos hatzibur is aleim lahaktim ulahavi es hashkolim ad aleph b'nisan. Let me just review this one more time. He says that there is no biblical obligation to withdraw funds at these 3 times of the year. As far as the Torah Chiyuv is concerned, all you need is Nisan. The rabbis divided the withdrawal into 3, to coincide with the three pilgrimage festivals, when all the Jews congregate in Yerushalayim. The withdrawal of funds for these sacrifices at those times remind the people, and this is the public nature of the Trumas Alishko, that they all had a personal share in each and every communal service. I'm only bothered by that phrase here. He writes that they all had a personal share in each and every communal service. I mean, that's conditional. It could be true, it might be true, but only if they actually came forward with their shkolim on time, which means, before Rosh Chodesh Nisan. It's a strange kind of thing. I'm telling the people that they have a share in the carbon seaboard. But wait a minute, do they have a share in the carbon seaboard? I really have to tell them that they better make sure that they bring in their shkolim, ba'od moed, on time, so then they can have a share in the carbon seaboard. The language is a little bit the drop ambiguous. The main thing is, if I wake you up in the middle of the night and I ask you why were they Torah Misalishka b'Sholosh Prakim Bashana, your answer should be that that's Kedei Lefarseim Hadova. That it's not a Doraisa Halacha, it's Kedei Lefarseim Hadova. And if in the middle of the night you're still tired, it would be really cruel of me to ask you why is it necessary to be Mefarseim? What are we trying to publicize? That's something that you can't remember in the middle of your night when you're half asleep. But the next morning, you'll remind yourself that the reason for Pirsum is to send out a clear-cut message to those who are rechokim that they have to get in their shkolim on time. Okay, let's go on. Now, we said that we have to notify the people to bring in their shkolim. Rabbi Yehuda ben Pazi B'Shem, meaning he said in the name of Rebbe, Hey Nikra Veloni Bas. How could we read the following psukim and not be overwhelmed by fear, by shuddering? Meaning the psukim are going to indicate that we don't fulfill the will of God the way we're supposed to. Even when we do good deeds, we don't do it perfectly. Only when we do evil, when we perpetrate evil, that we do perfectly. Shleimus. Litova. When Moshe Rabbeinu told Klal Yisrael at the time of the Trumas HaLishka, Trumas Meleches HaMishkan, this is this week's parsha. So he called upon them to contribute. And who came forward? So the pasuk says later on in Shmos, it says, "Vayavo anashim al anashim kol nidiv lev." So it's only people who fit into this description of the dive lev. Then the pasuk says, "Vayavo hanashim al hanashim kol nidiv lev." Now, when Aaron said to Klal Yisrael that they should give from their mammon, that was for the building of the Egel, lira up. They all responded generously, but for evil. Shenemar vayisparku kol ha'am. And then it says vayaviu es el aram. So this is an agadic statement that we should really be in a state of charada. That's how the Korban interprets it. Because even when we do a good deed, we don't do it with shlemus. How does he see that in the Nedivi Lev? Oh, I see. That it was only the Nedive Lev. So that's not called b'shlemus, meaning Moshe sent out a clarion call that it's time to contribute from your possessions, the gold, silver, etc., for the building of the Mishkan, and only a limited segment of the population came forward and responded positively. Those are the Nedive Lev. And that's called Lo Nenu Kula. They didn't all respond. It was only a representation of a small segment of Klal Yisrael. That's a critique. I thought that Kol Nediv Lev was a positive description. He's saying no, it's only the Nediv Lev. They were very special people who had a heart that prompted them to come forward with the contributions. Where were the rest of the people? And in contrast, when Aaron asks for contributions to build the Egel, it says Vayisparku Kol Ha'am es Nizmei Hazov Asher B'Yazneim Vayaviu El Moshe El Aaron. So who came forward to respond to Aaron's call? Nenu Kulam. They all came, said Kol Ha'am. When it came to the mitzvah of contributing for the Mishkan, yeah, some Nedive Lev came forward. But when it came to the contributions for the Egel, where was it? And the whole people. Everybody got up and contributed. That's not a very comforting feeling to learn this. He mentions the Rosh Sarleo here in the footnote that it not only wasn't, the disparaging comment is not only because it wasn't all the people who came forward to contribute, but moreover, because it says Vayavo Anoshim al Anoshim, it was the women folk who came first. Where were the men? Then he says again, Litova, another example of, unfortunately, Litova and Larav, his kapsus of gathering together the people. And this was for Kabbalah Sator, L'Kabel Pnei Shechina. Moshe had to be Mizaris there. And it says, Vayotzei Moshe es ha'am. Like, that's why people stay up the whole night of Shavuos to try to do a tikkun on the fact that that Moshe had to be Mizaris the people. They were sleeping, whatever, Lotziam, to come out. Vayotzei Moshe es ha'am. He physically took them out to the heart, to Kabbalah's Pnei Shechina, to receive the Torah. But Lira'ah, how difficult was it for the Meraglim, the 10 Meraglim, to gather together the people? V'tikrvune lai kulchem. V'tomru nishlacha anashim lefanenu v'yachperu lanu es haaretz. When it comes to Kabbalah Satorah, where are they? Moshe Rabbeinu has to pull them out like a a dentist pulls a tooth, pull him out of bed from the OL to come out to Kabbalas Hashchina. And when it comes to the Meraglim, look at the pasuk. Vatikravune like kulchem. We're all available. With Tova, another case, but Shira Sayom, it says Oz Yashir Moshe V'nei Yisrael Sashira Zog Lashem. So why does it say Oz Yashir Moshe Uvnei Yisrael? Apparently, Moshe Rabbeinu had to play an active role. Lahaschil Ula Oraram Lashir. Moshe Rabbeinu had to get them into the mood to respond to the shir. But Lira'ah, again back to the parasha of the Meraglim, Batisa Kol Ha'eda Vayitnu Eskola Vayivkuam Balaylahu. With response to the bad news, the bad report about Eretz Yisrael from the Meraglim, all the people were crying. Batisa Kol Ha'eda, the Torah goes out of its way to say Kol Ha'eda, in contrast to the Shira, where it was Moshe Rabbeinu who had to initiate the Shira. So we have a repetition 3 times over. Now, I just want to say one comment here. It always bothers me, when you find so much in the Agadah to castigate the people, and also in Tanakh, and find fault, what they call it, to clean your dirty laundry in public, all this castigation and all this focus on the failings of Klal Yisrael. We had a great Hasidic master, the great Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Mibarditchev. He would never say a bad word about Klal Yisrael, never even allow people to speak publicly in a negative, pejorative way about Israel. But I think there's a difference between past, present, and future. I mean, if we're dealing with studying the past, then the Torah was given for us to learn. And if it means that our forefathers, and maybe we're guilty as well, we're learning from that. Where was your zrizos? Only for ra'ah, not for good? Where were you at the time of giving contributions to the Mishkan? Only the Nedivei Lev. Where were you at the time of Kabbalas HaTorah? We had to wake you up to bring you out. Where were you at the time of Shira? And we're going to learn from that we had the energy for ra'ah, to listen to the Meraglim, or to build the Egel, or for the crying of that night, after the there we had the energy, and we gathered together all the people of Israel. But we're learning about the past, and if it means harsh castigation, the Mutzah Tocha, that's what we have to do. We have to take it to our hearts, and we have to learn from the past, not to repeat the errors of the past. But if you talk about the present, and you're looking around at Klal Yisrael, and you're making comments about Klal Yisrael, then at least there's one opinion, I think, one philosophy, and that of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, and I hope there are many others, that we don't want to focus on negativism about Klal Yisrael, to put us as a nation in a negative light. We are this and we are that, Jews are that, Jews are that. It's bad enough that our enemies will say that, those who hate the Jewish people, but that we should be speaking about that in our own holy books. So if I want to learn a tshuva from 2-3 centuries ago about the cholera epidemic and their words of castigation against the people, that they brought about this epidemic and was suffering so much, that's something that we want to learn from and rectify and improve our ways to avoid the same punishments. But to make public statements. I remember, I think it was 1978. It was a terrible terrorist attack. I mean, they took over buses and they killed men, women, and children. It was horrible. So there were people who got up publicly and said, "Oh yeah, because it was on Shabbos. They were traveling on Shabbos. The bus was traveling on Shabbos." And I remember my father, Zichrono Livracha, was very upset about that, about those kind of comments. You know why these people died. You, Misamcha, you have Ruach HaKodesh, and you're going to castigate the people publicly. It's not going to do any good as far as Kiruv is concerned. Okay, let's take a break here in the middle of this Agadita, and tomorrow we'll just wrap up the Agadita. Probably it'll take us another 10 minutes, and then we get back to the halachic part of Masechet Shekalim a little bit later on this Amud. So we're up to Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba. That's where we're going to take a break. Okay, then I wish everyone a great day.